When we think of Italian food today, we imagine rich sauces, parmesan showers, and fancy trattorias. But 100 years ago, in the crowded tenement kitchens of Little Italy, New York, things looked very different. The Italian immigrants who came here in the late 1800s and early 1900s didn't have much, just a few pots, a coal stove, and recipes whispered from home. Pasta wasn't just dinner, it was survival. It was a reminder of who they were. They brought the flavors of Sicily, Naples, Calabria, and Rome, and turned them into something uniquely American. A fusion born not in restaurants, but in cramped apartments above bakeries and butcher shops. In this series, we'll rediscover 25 pasta dishes that Italian immigrants actually cooked and ate in Little Italy. Dishes made from scraps, simple herbs, and pure love. Some were hearty, others humble, but each carried the taste of home. So grab a bowl and let's step back in time to the smoky kitchens and busy streets of old New York, where the story of Italian-American pasta truly began. Dish 1. Pasta e fagioli, pasta and beans. If you walked through Mulberry Street around 1910, you'd smell this dish from nearly every window. Pasta e fagioli, pasta and beans, the meal of the poor yet rich in flavor. It began as a peasant dish in southern Italy, where beans were cheaper than meat. In New York, families used whatever beans they could find, often cannellini or navy beans, boiled slowly with garlic, onions, and scraps of pork fat saved from the butcher. In a pot, they'd saute garlic in olive oil, or sometimes even lard, then stir in crushed tomatoes, a handful of beans, and just enough pasta to thicken it all together. The trick? Simplicity. No cream, no butter, just patience and heart. Kids called it pasta fazool, an American twist on the Neapolitan name. For many, this was the only warm meal of the week, but it fed body and soul alike. Dish 2. Spaghetti aglio e olio, garlic and oil. No dish represents Little Italy's resilience better than this one. Aglio e olio, garlic and oil pasta, was born out of empty cupboards. Immigrants couldn't afford meat or fancy ingredients, but they could afford garlic, olive oil, and dried spaghetti. They'd boil the pasta, heat oil in a pan, toss in thin slices of garlic until golden, and finish with red pepper flakes for a touch of heat. It was more than a meal. It was dignity. Even when there was little, Italians knew how to make something beautiful. At Sunday dinners, it was often the first course, a reminder that simplicity can be divine. Dish 3. Pasta con le sarde, pasta with sardines. This Sicilian classic crossed the ocean in the pockets of fishermen and dock workers. In Palermo, it was made with fresh sardines, wild fennel, and pine nuts. In New York, they improvised. Canned sardines replaced fresh, and sometimes even breadcrumbs stood in for pine nuts. They'd melt anchovies into olive oil, add onions, raisins, and sardines, then toss with bucatini or spaghetti. The sweet and salty mix was a taste of home for many who worked long hours by the Hudson docks. It reminded them of the sea, of sunlit coasts far away, even as they stood in smoky tenement kitchens, half a world apart. Dish 4. Baked ziti al forno. Baked ziti became the centerpiece of family gatherings, especially weddings and baptisms in Little Italy. Unlike the fancy lasagnas of northern Italy, ziti was humble, hearty, and easy to share. They'd mix cooked ziti with tomato sauce, ricotta, and mozzarella, layer it in a battered baking dish, and bake until golden and bubbling. Sometimes bits of sausage or meatball leftovers made their way in, but most families kept it simple. Every block in Little Italy had its own version. The smell of baked ziti meant one thing: someone was celebrating. It was joy, baked in a dish. The dish 5. Pasta alla norma. Named after an opera from Sicily, pasta alla norma became a favorite among southern Italian immigrants. Eggplant, tomatoes, basil, and ricotta salata. All simple, all affordable. They'd fry cubes of eggplant until soft, mix them with tomato sauce, and toss it all with pasta. If they were lucky, they'd sprinkle aged ricotta salata on top, or whatever cheese scraps they had. This was a dish of pride, one that said, "We may be far from home, but we still have flavor, music, and love." In the next part, we'll explore more dishes, from immigrant boarding houses to the first Italian-American restaurants, each one telling a story of hope, hunger, and heart. Dish 6, pasta al pomodoro, tomato pasta. Now here's one you've definitely heard of, pasta al pomodoro. It's probably the simplest and most famous Italian dish ever made. But in early 1900s Little Italy, this wasn't a luxury meal. It was everyday survival food. Tomatoes were cheap, pasta was cheap, and together they made magic. Immigrant families would boil spaghetti, toss it in a sauce made from canned tomatoes, garlic, and a pinch of salt. No fancy herbs, no Parmesan mountains, just pure, honest flavor. Sometimes they'd crush fresh basil from a tiny pot on the windowsill. That smell, tomatoes and basil simmering, it filled whole apartment buildings. People didn't cook for taste alone. They cooked to feel human again after 12 hours of hard labor. And pasta al pomodoro gave them that comfort. Dish 7. Cavatelli with broccoli rabe. If you were from southern Italy, you probably missed the bitter greens, the wild vegetables you'd pick fresh back home. In New York, Italian immigrants found something similar, broccoli rabe. They'd toss it with homemade cavatelli pasta, tiny hand-rolled pieces made from just flour and water. No eggs, no machines. They'd boil the pasta, sauté garlic in olive oil, add the greens, then toss it all together. The flavor was earthy and a bit bitter, but that was exactly the point. It reminded them of home. It wasn't fancy restaurant food. It was Nonna's kitchen food. Quick, hearty, and real. Dish 8. Spaghetti with meatballs, all right. The big one. Spaghetti and meatballs. You might think this is an Italian classic, but here's the truth. This dish was born in America. Back in Italy, meat was a rare treat, but in America, even poor immigrants could afford a little ground beef or pork now and then. So they started mixing it with breadcrumbs, garlic, and eggs to stretch it further, rolling it into small meatballs and simmering them in tomato sauce. They weren't the giant restaurant meatballs we see today. They were small, just enough for each plate to have one or two. Families shared. That's how it worked. Pasta went into the pot, a sauce simmered on the stove, and when it all came together, it smelled like Sunday, even if it wasn't Sunday. Dish 9. Linguine with clam sauce down by the docks. Seafood was everywhere. Cheap, fresh, and sometimes even free if you knew the right fishermen. That's where linguine with clam sauce found its New York flavor. Originally a Neapolitan coastal dish, Italian immigrants adapted it using local East Coast clams. They'd sauté garlic, olive oil, and a splash of white wine, toss in chopped clams, and mix it all with the linguine. The smell alone made neighbors knock on your door. It wasn't fancy dining. It was just Tuesday night on Mott Street, and when they added parsley or a squeeze of lemon, you'd swear you were standing by the sea, even if all you could see were brick walls. Dish 10. Rigatoni alla Grizia. Now this one goes way back, even older than carbonara. Rigatoni alla Grizia was made with guanciale, cured pork cheek, black pepper, and pecorino cheese. It came from Rome, and Roman immigrants kept the recipe alive in New York. Of course, most couldn't find guanciale in the city, so they used bacon or pancetta instead. It still had that same salty, smoky kick. They'd fry the pork until crisp, toss in the rigatoni, and sprinkle cheese right over the top. No cream, no sauce, just flavor. Simple, strong, and satisfying. And that's really what Little Italy food was all about. Using what you had, making it taste incredible, and feeding everyone you loved. So far, we've seen how these dishes started from struggle. Simple food made with heart. But in the next part, we'll move into the recipes that began shaping Italian American restaurant culture. The ones that went from tenement kitchens to menu boards across New York. Dish 11. Stuffed shells, conchigli ripiena. When families had a little extra time, or a special Sunday meal, they made stuffed shells. Big pasta shells filled with ricotta, spinach, and a sprinkle of mozzarella. In Italy, this was a festive dish, but in Little Italy, it became a way to use leftovers. If you had a bit of extra sauce, a spoon of cheese, or some old spinach that needed cooking, you'd stuff it into the shells, cover it with tomato sauce, and bake. The smell of bubbling cheese filled the apartment halls. Kids waited with plates in hand. Everyone shared, sometimes 3 families in one kitchen. It wasn't just about food, it was about community. You helped your neighbor, you fed whoever showed up. And that spirit made Little Italy feel like home. Dish 12. Pasta alla puttanesca. This one has got a wild history. Pasta alla puttanesca. Legend says it was invented by women who needed a quick meal between customers. But for Italian immigrants in New York, it was simply the fastest, most flavorful dish they could make. They'd throw together whatever they had. Canned tomatoes, olives, anchovies, garlic, and capers. No planning, no measuring, just instinct. The result? Salty, spicy, rich, and unforgettable. It became a go-to dinner for tired workers who came home late and hungry, and it could be ready in 10 minutes flat. Toss spaghetti in that briny sauce. Top it with parsley, and you've got a dish that tastes way more expensive than it is. Dish 13. Pasta e ceci, pasta and chickpeas. When money was tight, and that happened a lot, chickpeas came to the rescue. Pasta e ceci was one of those dishes that stretched a handful of ingredients into a full meal. You'd simmer chickpeas with garlic, tomato paste, and sometimes a scrap of bacon or ham bone for flavor. Then you toss in small pasta shapes, ditalini or broken spaghetti, and let it all come together in one pot. It's thick, it's warm, and it fills you up fast. For immigrant families, it was perfect. Cheap, easy, and full of protein. No measuring cups, no timers, just grandma's hand and memory. That's how these dishes survived generations. Dish 14. Fettuccine Alfredo now. You might be surprised to hear that fettuccine Alfredo wasn't common in Little Italy at first. It was actually an upscale dish from Rome. Butter, cheese, and pasta. No cream at all. But once the recipe hit New York in the 1920s, Italian-American families made it their own. They used what they had. Sometimes milk instead of cream, a little flour to thicken the sauce, maybe even garlic for flavor. They toss fresh fettuccine in melted butter, stir in cheese, and mix until it turned creamy. Simple, rich, and comforting. Exactly what people wanted after a long week. And just like that, Alfredo became a household name. Another Italian dish reborn in America. Dish 15. Pasta con aglio, olio, e peperoncino, garlic, oil, and chili. We already talked about aglio e olio, but this version adds a little kick. Red chili flakes, or peperoncino. It was the go-to midnight snack in Little Italy. After work, after church, after long nights talking on stoops, someone would say, "Let's make a little pasta." And this was it. Fast, hot, and comforting. You heat the oil, add garlic slices, toss in chili flakes, and swirl in spaghetti with a little pasta water. That's it. 4 ingredients. But the flavor hits like a memory. It's the kind of dish that made you forget how hard the week was, if only for a few minutes. Dish 16. Lasagna al Forno. Oven-baked lasagna. Alright, here's one that became a star in early Italian American restaurants. Lasagna al Forno. Every big Sunday meal had it. Layers of pasta, sauce, ricotta, and sometimes meat if you could afford it. In Italy, lasagna was more of a regional dish, different everywhere you went. But in New York, it became a celebration dish. Restaurant owners realized people loved it. Cheesy, filling, and perfect for sharing. They'd layer cooked sheets of pasta with tomato sauce, meat, ricotta, and mozzarella. Bake it until golden on top. It took hours to make, but when it came out of the oven, everyone clapped. It was the showstopper. And the smell of lasagna coming from a Little Italy restaurant was enough to stop people on the sidewalk. Dish 17. Tortellini in brodo. Now let's talk comfort food. Tortellini in brodo. This one came from northern Italy, but it made its way to New York through families from Bologna and Modena. Back then, winters were cold, apartments were drafty, and this dish was pure warmth in a bowl. Little handmade tortellini filled with cheese or ground meat, floating in a hot, savory broth. They'd roll the pasta by hand, fold it into tiny rings, and simmer them gently. Even the smell could make you feel better. Most restaurants served it around Christmas, a special occasion meal that reminded immigrants of the holidays back home. Dish 18. Penne alla vodka. Here's a fun one. Penne alla vodka. Now, technically, this dish came a bit later, around the 1970s, but it's rooted in the old Italian-American habit of experimentation. Restaurants wanted something creamy, something new, so they mixed tomato sauce, cream, and a splash of vodka. That vodka helped the sauce blend better, pulling out flavors from the tomato. They'd saute garlic and onions, add tomato paste, cream, and vodka, then toss in penne. It was silky, rich, and had that perfect little tang. It became an instant classic, proof that Italian-American cooking never stopped evolving. Dish 19. Orecchiette with sausage and broccoli rabe. Back to something hearty. Orecchiette with sausage and broccoli rabe. Orecchiette means little ears, and it came from southern Italy, especially Puglia. When southern Italians came to New York, they brought this rustic combo: bitter greens, spicy sausage, and chewy pasta. It was bold, simple, and perfect for restaurant menus because it looked fancy but used cheap ingredients. They'd brown sausage, toss in garlic, olive oil, and the greens, then finish it all with the pasta. No heavy sauce, just flavor. By the mid-1900s, this dish became a Little Italy favorite, both at home and in restaurants. Dish 20, spaghetti carbonara. And finally, for this part, the legend, spaghetti carbonara. This one's story is interesting. It's said to have been created by Italian coal workers. Carbonari, hence the name. It arrived in America around World War II, when Italian immigrants reconnected with recipes from home. Eggs, cheese, cured pork, and black pepper. That's it. No cream, no fancy stuff. They'd cook the spaghetti, mix in crispy bacon or pancetta, then toss everything with beaten eggs and cheese. The heat from the pasta cooked the eggs just enough to make a creamy sauce. It was fast, cheap, and satisfying, perfect for restaurant kitchens and home tables alike. Dish 21, manicotti. Let's start with one of the coziest comfort foods out there. Manicotti. If you grew up in an Italian-American home, chances are you've seen these big pasta tubes filled with creamy ricotta and baked in tomato sauce. In early Little Italy, this was a special Sunday dish, something families made when everyone could gather. You'd roll out homemade crepes or boil pasta tubes, Fill them with ricotta, maybe a little spinach or parsley, then bake until bubbling. The smell of tomato sauce and melted cheese filled the house. Kids set the table. Grandparents told stories. It wasn't just food, it was an event. For immigrant families, cooking like this was their way of saying, we made it. We're still together, still strong, still Italian, even in New York. Dish 22. Gnocchi with tomato sauce. Next up, gnocchi. Soft little potato dumplings that melt in your mouth. In Italy, they were a Thursday tradition. In Little Italy, they became a payday treat, something families made when they could afford a little extra flour and potatoes. They'd mash boiled potatoes, mix in flour, roll the dough into ropes, and cut it into tiny pieces. Boil until they floated, then toss in tomato sauce and a sprinkle of cheese. Simple, soft, comforting. In a world that often felt hard, gnocchi reminded people what comfort really meant. Dish 23. Spaghetti alla amatriciana. If there's one dish that shows how flavors travel, it's spaghetti alla amatriciana. It came from a small town in Italy, Amatrice, and it became a hit in New York because of one ingredient, pork. In America, pork was cheap and easy to find. So immigrants used bacon or pancetta with tomato sauce and cheese. That combination, salty, tangy, a little spicy, became unforgettable. They'd fry the pork, add crushed tomatoes, toss it in spaghetti, and finish with pecorino cheese. It was the perfect mix of old Italy and new America, just like the people cooking it. Dish 24. Bucatini alla amatriciana. Once Little Italy restaurants started booming, spaghetti alla matriziana got an upgrade. It became bucatini alla matriziana. Bucatini looks like spaghetti, but has a tiny hole running through it. Restaurants loved it because it soaked up sauce better and looked elegant on the plate. They used imported bucatini, rich tomato sauce, crispy pancetta, and shaved cheese. Customers loved it. And suddenly, this humble pasta became a restaurant favorite all across New York. That's the magic of Little Italy, taking something simple and making it shine. Dish 25, spaghetti marinara. And finally, the dish that started it all, spaghetti marinara. It's the simplest of them all. Pasta, tomatoes, garlic, and olive oil. But for immigrants, it was more than just a meal. It was a piece of home. Affordable, reliable, and shared with everyone. Every family had their own version. A little more garlic here, a pinch of sugar there, sometimes a spoon of leftover meat sauce mixed in, a pot of sauce on the stove, steam fogging the windows, laughter filling the air. That's what home tasted like in Little Italy. No one needed a recipe, just love and memory, and somehow it was always perfect. The heart of Little Italy. By the time the 1950s rolled around, Little Italy had changed. Many families moved out to Brooklyn, Queens, and beyond. But the food, the pasta, the sauce, the Sunday meals never went away. Every dish we've talked about today, from pasta e fagioli to spaghetti marinara, carries a story of survival, family, and the belief that even when life was hard, dinner could still be special. These recipes weren't born in fancy restaurants. They were born in small kitchens, on wooden tables, in crowded apartments, where love was the main ingredient. And that's what makes them timeless. So next time you sit down to a bowl of pasta, remember, you're not just tasting food, you're tasting history. You're tasting Little Italy.